Happy Monday, Matt.
Happy Monday. How's it going, Joe?
Very good. Very good. Still recovering from some jet lag. I imagine that you are as well. It looks like you're back in New York.
I I am. I'm back in New York and yeah, feeling a bit of jet lag. I'll take a nap later. It just feels like permanent jet lag at this point, I think.
Mm.
And your jet lag has to be way worse than mine, frankly.
Well, so if you view it as sort of like sedimentary layers,
Yeah.
right? So you just have jet lag piled on top of jet lag, and this is how it is. So now you get a taste of it. 'Cause you're going back to Europe later this week again. So
Correct. Yeah.
little jet setter.
Yeah. So I might try to keep my Europe schedule here and just go to bed super early. We'll see if that works. Sometimes that works for me. Going the other way usually doesn't work. But
Yeah, it's hard.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, yeah. What are you gonna be doing in Europe?
I am going. So I am going to be at a conference October 5th and 6th in Budapest. This is known as CrunchConf, and it's a kind of a local data conference, but people are welcome to join from all over the world, of course. That should be a lot of fun. My talk is actually about the future of data engineering, and more specifically, in the description, I say, if Joe and I were to do a second edition of our book, what would we say? Like, what has changed since we published? And I think it's actually quite a bit, which is bizarre, right? We tried really, really hard to write something fairly timeless, and then the whole world changed within a year.
Well, it
It's kind of
changed, but it didn't change that
yeah,
much.
yeah.
You
A
know what I
lot of stuff
mean?
stayed the same. That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean I don't think things like the data engineering life cycle
No,
disappear,
no, they
and I
don't.
don't think that yeah. But yeah, we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
it's yeah, but anyway, here we're talking about data engineering, so if the audience has any questions, we're happy to answer them. Otherwise, we're just going to keep ranting
Yes.
about
Always.
stuff. But yeah, I mean, so what to you has changed fundamentally in like the last year with data
Well,
engineering?
so I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you some of my impressions of Big Data London, and then you can tell me if you agree. I feel like at the start of 2023, everyone was very, very excited about generative AI, and the hype only grew as the year wore on. And then at this point, we're not settling into disillusionment. We're just more settling into normalcy. That's what Big Data London felt like to me. It's like we're beyond the Gen AI hype, and now it's like, okay, what do I need to do as a data engineer to support these use cases? I'm not going to get super hyped up about it, but like, how does this work? How do I use the life cycle to support model training, to support output quality analysis and model analysis, and look at model drift and these kinds of issues? I don't know. What were your thoughts? Because it did feel the conference felt more settled than like Databricks Summit a couple months ago.
Oh, well, I mean, Databricks had the signs out front that said Gen AI, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, they definitely did.
Generation AI.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
duh.
right.
Snowflake was the same way. I mean, they had Spencer Huang from NVIDIA giving a talk there, so it was definitely all things AI. Yeah, I mean, it felt like it's just one of those inescapable forces where it's
Right,
like every vendor has to be a quote AI vendor now.
right.
Whether or not actually they're doing it or not, I think it's open to debate.
Or
And
whether or
probably
not
some
it's useful, even if they've
yeah,
integrated
whether
it,
or not it's
right?
useful,
That's
right?
yeah,
So it reminds me of like ML vendors back in the day saying, "Oh, we're doing machine learning or quote AI." This is back in the 2015 timeframe, but you look under the
yeah,
hood, it's like literally time series forecasting or linear regression, which is just sad and
yeah,
pathetic. But yeah, it seems like we're settling into sort of this phase of generative AI. And I think we're starting to understand sort of the useful boundaries of it as well
right.
versus you know um, January whatever. It's like, oh, this is like going to change the world. I'm like, it is, but if you look at like ChatGPT usage, for example, I'm curious to see what happens. Now that school's back in session, if
Yeah,
it goes back up. But for if it's a truly disruptive technology, you would expect that usage would continue skyrocketing regardless, right? But if it goes down, then I think you're starting to figure out what the utility really is of this,
right, right.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, generative AI for data engineering, though. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, there are quite a few talks on this, and like your perspective on this, and then we'll obviously talk to the audience as well.
Yeah,
The audience will talk to us too.
yeah. We'd love to hear from the audience. We're starting to see some questions in the chat here, which is fantastic. I mean, I kind of would like to see us reduce the artificial distinctions between ML ops and data engineering. And I'm not saying that they're the same. What I'm saying is that there's a big area of overlap. And often in practice, the two just operate in complete silos, which is very inefficient. it makes a lot more sense for ML ops to integrate more with data engineering where they overlap, I think. So you're not
Oh yeah.
reinventing the wheel for a lot of these
Oh, I
workflows.
agree. And I had that in one of my articles. Boring
Yeah.
is back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Came a couple weeks ago, right? Where the third point I made was that the data and ML divide needs to break down. It's nonsensical that it's there. Somebody pushed back at me, said, "Oh, but it has to be there." And I'm like, "No, it doesn't. Not at all. Actually, ML is a natural continuum of what data
Mhm.
engineers do." And I definitely, we wrote about this in the last chapter of our book, actually, where all these
Right.
roles are going to be merging. People thought I was crazy at the time, but you're already starting to see it. Traditional data pipelining tools and whatnot that are traditionally going to analytical stores, like Airbyte's a good example. They started integrating with Pinecone, and I think you're just going to see more and more integration because this having this separate divide doesn't really serve anybody in the end. It
Right.
just makes things about 10 times more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah.
So
And I think what we see a lot, especially in Silicon Valley, is that people want to silo off their workflows so they can claim higher salaries, basically.
well, this is somebody who had an ML who was also an AI vendor. So I mean, they have a vested interest in
Yeah.
maintaining this
Doing both.
duality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly. But
yeah.
yeah, the reality is that a lot of these pipelines can flow to multiple destinations, including like kind of your ML ops side, your ML training and such, and then your more traditional use cases for data. Because in spite of the claims that all the traditional analytics are just going to be replaced by LLMs, I'm not seeing that so far. So you
No, I
still
mean the
need the
work I've been doing
basics.
on data models and LLMs right now, it's
Yeah.
definitely the case that as long as you're querying an underlying data source, the data model has to have some sort of integrity or um, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Unless AI just figures out a way to start doing this all by itself, in which case, cool, congratulations. Nobody's needed anymore,
Yeah.
so we're
Yeah.
sort of a moot point.
Yeah. I kind of feel like we're in the era where it's kind of like the internet in the 90s. There were people that said that everything was going to change overnight, and other people that said that the internet didn't matter and it wasn't useful. And the reality is that the internet did change everything, but slowly. It really started to change things more getting into the 2000s. That's where it
Yep.
started replacing all of these, traditional flows of finding information. It just took a while, and I think it's going to take a while for us to dial in on the utility of generative AI, even though there's a huge gee whiz factor right now.
Gee whiz.
Yeah.
Let's get to some comments here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Gajapati, I guess. He asks, can you share your opinion on how data engineering and data governance is going to change to cater to the AI revolution? What are your thoughts on this question?
I think to your point about things that are boring, we still need to focus a lot on fundamentals. And so things like data integrity, data quality, data privacy. But we probably, in some cases, need to get better at handling certain types of unstructured data that maybe we weren't handling so much before on the data engineering side in many roles.
Yeah, I just hope data governance gets adopted more. That's part
Yeah.
of my boring
Yeah.
argument. It's like, and somebody, I think it's Malcolm Hawker had an article or a post a few weeks ago about how large language models might be the kick in the pants data governance needs to work. And I'm like, at this point, I think any Hail Mary that data governance can get, I think they should take. It's so hard to implement this stuff in practice, and so but it's absolutely necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just super hard. And so I hope that data governance changes to cater to the quote AI revolution. Because I think what's been going on right now, it's just high friction. It's one of these things that's, talking with a friend of mine over dinner the other night, very big into the data governance space. And it's a hard sell to companies. It's a hard sell to leadership. You're talking just, what's the ROI on this? Well, it's easier to sell picks and shovels than it is good practices.
Yeah, and let me give you a very concrete example of the ROI of data governance. So I have many friends who are attorneys, so do you. And for them, they're actually very interested in generative AI and large language models as tools of augmentation, but many of them won't touch these tools because they can't guarantee that their data won't leak into model training and such. That's data governance, to say this is partitioned data. Law firms, we're going to charge you a lot of money for this service, but we're going to guarantee that your data is protected and that it's not going to end up somewhere where it shouldn't.
You're going to guarantee it?
I mean, that's the thing. You have to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Or they're not going to pay you that money. They have to have legal guarantees from you saying that you're not going to leak.
Well, especially the EU AI Act that's coming
Yeah.
up, right? And
Yeah.
we're going to have Kai Zenner on the show, on the head EU parliamentarians over the act, but I mean that's a
Yeah.
big deal, and that's going
Yep.
to change
Yep.
a lot of stuff. Like
It is.
governance is you're going to have to get into it,
Yeah.
which in the past, there it's been immune, but I would say
Yeah.
going forward, it's like I think it's not going to be negotiable. So
Right.
yeah.
And that's another ROI area, right? So if you don't comply, then you're talking very expensive fines. You're talking other forms of sanctions, like you can't even do business anymore. All kinds of different things that you might be facing.
Only in the
So
EU though.
only well, but we're going to see it in
I'm
the
kidding.
U.S. as well, right? Like CCPA is going to be, I assume, expanded. There's going to be legislation on AI and data utilization across the country. Yeah.
There will be, but in the U.S. it's a different. It's a bit interesting. I mean, the EU is definitely political, but I think in the U.S. every law is basically meant to bash the other side, so to speak. So I'm very curious to see what an AI regulation looks like in the U.S. because it's meant to basically kneecap your opponents at this point. Which again, as Kai was pointing out, the EU AI Act was a lot of grandstanding from politicians too. I mean, they could have just as easily fit that into the GDPR, but politicians want to be around the cool new AI initiative versus some amendment to the GDPR. So
Yeah, yeah, and the problem is that when it's not flashy, they become less interested, which means that you're not really refining public policy the way you should in a practical way. But that's a whole other discussion.
whole other discussion. Let's talk about data engineering.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is data engineering.
It is.
Unfortunately, this is
This
the
is
stuff
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
what it is. Yeah, yeah. And shout out, by the way, to everybody at Big Data London we ran into. It was a really fun conference. Yeah, I think part of what you were thinking about for the topic of this was driven by Big Data London. I liked it
Yeah,
just because it was great to
definitely.
see half the data world was there, or probably more, and it was just good to see a lot of friends there. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
agree. It was very crowded that first day. It was pretty insane.
there was 21,000 registrants. I think 14,000 attended.
Oh man, I
So
would believe it. I would believe it based on what
yeah,
I saw. It was a lot of fun. You would run into people every 100 feet or so. Like every 30 seconds, you'd run into someone you knew or someone wanted to talk to you. They'd like, "Hey, I love your book" or whatever. But it was intense. It was like
oh
a
yeah,
mosh pit of data.
oh yeah. And I usually hide out before I give a talk too, like because I just get hate to say it, but definitely mobbed to some degree, and so it's like I need to save my energy for my talk. And so if anyone if I was a bit short with people, I'm very very sorry. It's good to see everyone there though. But what are some other questions? What was also interesting from the conference was data mesh was like I think the talk of the town
Mhm.
last year. Zhamak gave a wonderful keynote, and but this year generative AI eclipsed it. I was talking with Scott Harlan about that, and it's kind of like it's you got your own data mesh theater now, but it's interesting that generative AI just sort of took it. And I told Zhamak sort of cheekily that she should be definitely happy that generative AI came into the room and kind of eclipse data mesh. So you could actually just focus on building it versus
Yeah.
addressing all the hype. So
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so let's ask this. Do you think that is data mesh related to generative AI? Are the data mesh style, collaboration patterns better for companies that want to work on AI and model training?
should we come up with a transformer model for data mesh?
There you
Where
go.
you
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
transform. Yeah, we could do that. I just yeah, for collaborative data sharing, we're gonna use transformer models now. So might be something there. I don't know. I just pulled that out of my ass, but I mean, it is interesting because I mean, you will have use cases where companies are serving data, um, you know, out of LLMs or generative AI, and I think that's just one more manifestation of data, collaboration and sharing to the data mesh model. But I don't think it makes it better or worse.
I might argue that maybe the data mesh model is better for collaboration between ML engineering teams and other like more traditional data warehousing, business analytics teams. But I don't know. I'd love to see. Maybe I'll have to think more of that about that. Off the top of my head, that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, I think we got to get to the first step of like just implementing generative AI, at
Yeah,
scale
yeah,
at companies. Let's just
definitely.
start there, and then we can talk
Yeah,
about how we're going to be using it. Because I think again, there's a lot of hype, but as I asked
sure.
people at the beginning of my talk on data modeling, I'm like, okay, so who in this room is willing to bet your salary and your job by hooking up a large language model to your existing corporate data sets? Never has anybody raised their hand except one friend of mine, and she's working at a company where they are implementing a large language model, and so she gets passed. She's already doing it, but I think it's just this I don't know, a lot of unknowns, right? I mean,
a
you can
lot of
barely
the
do
noise.
BI on top of most of these data sets. You telling me you're going to hook up a large language model that will also issue text to SQL queries and then try and query this data in a reliable fashion? I don't think so.
Well, and we already have like data quality and answer consistency issues in many cases, which will only get worse if you start using tools like this that also throw in the potential to misunderstand basic column names, data definitions, hallucinations. So, yeah, we still have to solve a lot of these fundamental problems.
Yeah, yeah. Or just ignore them like we've been doing for the past.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah. Just focus on the hype, focus on bringing in more investor money.
Yeah, no, I mean, sadly, that's the reality of it, and we're not being cynical. We're just being realists here.
Yeah.
George Farrakhan, what's up, man? It's good to hang out with him. Is the headrest thing? Just kidding. I'm guessing him at the hardest thing. If he's typing up from his phone in a data engineering role after the infrastructure and pipe. What's the hardest thing in a data engineering role after the infrastructure and pipelines have been set up? What do you think, Matt?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it is the stuff we've been talking about. It's back to the basics. It's like managing data quality. It's making sure that the quality of your data remains high. It's data governance. It's adopting new use cases. Like really, the infrastructure has become the easy part over time, and all these other operational parts have become more challenging as we've scaled up.
Yep. I agree with that. I think it's all the enterprisey stuff, right? I think infrastructure and pipelines have gotten a lot simpler.
Yep.
Obviously, depending on what you're doing, you may be customizing to a large degree. But I would say, for a lot of companies, it's a solved problem, right? The tooling, you can get 90% of the way there. The hardest 10% is always the hardest 10%,
Yeah.
right? And that's just what it means. What do I mean by that? All the boring stuff that we were just talking about. All the hard practices, best practices, all the stuff you conveniently ignore because you're too busy playing around with tooling. Well, now you have a chance to solve them. But it takes time, it takes investment, and again, it takes I think a willingness to show the ROI of this kind of stuff, right? Because like investing in your team's education, for example, the biggest gap that I see right now, Matt, is it's an education issue.
Yep.
It's knowledge and
Agreed.
skills. It's got nothing to do with tools. You show me the worst data tool today, and it's still better than what we had 10 years ago.
Oh, agree.
Yeah, and we're still managing to do okay back then. So I can't buy the argument that it's a tooling question, but it has been and always will be a knowledge gap issue.
Yep.
Like best practices with tools, best practices in general, right? Like that's just conveniently shut off because why do that?
Well, and frankly, I've been saying for a while that a lot of the critiques of the modern data stack come down to the fact that we've torn down barriers to entry. I think that's a positive thing. But that means that anyone can be turned loose with these tools with no training. And so you have out of control spending, you have poor pipeline development practices, you have poor data quality, you have no focus on use cases for the business. And those are all things that can be mitigated with more training and focus on those core issues across the organization.
Yep. So I would say now you have all the fancy tools, like just invest the time to upskill your team. I think that's the hardest part. It's just because I mean, every day you show up to work is a chance to do something great or a chance to keep piling more tech and data debt. Pick your poison. What do you want to do? How do you want to live your best life?
On social media.
On social media.
Data, social media.
Yeah. Data, social media. Which one would that be, by the way? Is that
there are many. There are many.
There are many. There's Twitter, which I'm not on, but
there's Threads. There's LinkedIn, obviously. There's Instagram. A lot goes on Instagram, I guess.
Yeah. See here. There's a long question here. I'm just trying to read this question from you around. Okay, this is going to take up like half of the page here. Sorry.
All right.
Hey, Joe and Matt, LinkedIn user. Don't have your name. Sorry. Question for me is around data engineering and distributed organization. We in IT are trying to get help of data analysts, scientists, and the business unit sites by building a central data repository and tool stack from which they can all do their thing. And not have IT do it for them, just provide good data and some governance. Are we destined to fail with such an approach? Matt, are they destined to fail?
That is a good question. So there are certainly some details here that I'd probably want to talk about to dig deeper into the question. But it does sound like we'll throw out the buzzword again, but it does sound like a place where data mesh might apply, and that is make parts of the company responsible for providing their data you can still have centralization on top of that data mesh structure. In other words, on top of organizations providing their data and managing quality for their data sets, and then have a more curated version that appears in a central data warehouse. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I mean, there's too many questions I would have to, I think, to give a proper
that's fair.
prognosis of the
Yeah,
situation.
this is just kind of
It's like,
estimating.
to say, are you destined to fail? It's like, on one hand, everyone is destined to fail at some point. That's just reality. Are you destined to succeed?
Yeah.
In some areas, yeah, probably. I hope you do. But distributed organizations are hard. Right. So I would recommend actually reading books like Team Topologies and understanding the impacts of Conway's law on your initiatives, and just understand, are certain things feasible, right? On one hand, you're trying to decentralize. On the other hand, you're trying to, go the opposite direction. And I don't know. I think it just, what do you mean by distributed, right? So that's another big question. Yeah. But distributed, I think, tends to be a lot harder than centralized for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
Good old command and control, it does work, surprisingly enough.
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah, in a sense it does. I mean, I see in organizations that we've seen, it's overwhelmingly centralized, I suppose, and maybe we're just survivorship bias, but
yeah,
I don't know. But good luck. Yeah. Let's see here. There are a bunch of good questions here.
Yeah.
So many that actually, here's Jake Carter. What's up, Jake? He's been asked a number of times, two themes of questions. Question one, how do you feel about the various methodologies used in data warehouse modeling? Question two, how do you envision the evolution of data warehousing over the upcoming decade? And these are this couple of times in recent interview. Yeah, so I'm not sure if there's a job interview or a press interview, but anyway, what do you think of question one and two for Jake's comment?
That's a good question. I think in terms of data modeling, I think what we've been seeing, and we kind of even saw this in some of the conversations at Big Data London, is you have the wide table crowd who are like, just throw out all the old techniques and just use one big table. And you have the kind of Kimball crowd that's like, no, everything Kimball is the pure way to do things, just do everything Kimball. And I think the reality is that neither of those approaches is particularly good, and you need to figure out, okay, how do I find a middle approach that uses a lot of Kimball techniques, but
one big Kimball,
maybe. And I think, but there's a lot of space to actually properly map out some parameters for how you do this. But I think people have kind of intuited how to do that in some cases. I've seen people figure out, okay, this is a good hybrid of the two. This is about how wide I want my table to be, and this is where I'm going to split out separate tables. But there is a lot of opportunity to really plant a stake in the ground and define more formal practices here. Maybe that's what you're doing with your book, Joe. So maybe
surprisingly enough, it is what I'm doing.
Great.
I think it's
yeah.
I wish we'd move the discussion beyond one big table and Kimball.
Yeah.
This argument's a bit trite to me. I think do what works best for you. If you Rob Harmon had a really good post on this the other day too, where he was talking about the flaws of dimensional modeling, right, and so forth. I think there certainly are. It could arguably be slower depending on the type of production system you're using, but I don't think it escapes the fact that what you're doing, at a conceptual level, is really thinking about your business in terms of events and things that those events are attributed to, right? The nouns and so forth. And I think so. It's more of a thinking exercise. Like I've been saying, data modeling is very much a thinking person's sport. And we'll get to part two of his question in a second. And so at this point, I'd say use what works for you. Understand all the techniques and understand the trade-offs, and pick what works for you. If one big table works for you, great. But understand why that's better versus Kimball. And I'm tired of the arguments, basically, that we should only pick one way. As I was saying, the religious wars in data modeling, I think, are part of the reason we're in this mess right now. Then one big table. I mean, you got to remember that started because MapReduce systems and big data systems, they just perform better when you had one big table. But now people are taking that to say, oh, well, because I have small data, but I'll still use one big table. It's like, well, you got to realize that was made for distributed systems back in the day when you joins were not going to be performant. That's exactly why they did that. But don't just cargo cult these techniques. Understand what they're about. And I think that's the biggest gap right now is we just we take things at face value. We don't understand where they came from or why we do it. Like read Kimball's book, go page to page, read the whole thing. It's excellent. It's one of the best books in data. Is it the only book that you should read in data? Hell no. Absolutely not.
There's
right?
quite a lot of stuff.
Read them all. Read our book. Read Martin Kleppman's book. Read
Bill Inman's book.
Bill Inman's books. All 67
Data
of them.
Warehouse. Data Warehouse
Read
Toolkit.
Charlie and Chocolate Factory while you're at it. Great book. The second part of the question: how do you envision the evolution of data warehousing over the upcoming decade? What do you think?
That is a good question. I don't have a good answer for this one. To me, it does feel like we're going to see major changes in this domain eventually, due to tools like large language models rather. But I'm not super clear on where that's going to go. I think there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of futuristic prediction, but I don't think anyone knows at this point. Maybe you know, Joe.
I don't know. I mean, let's get back to what we mean by data warehousing, though. I think this is another term that's been overloaded. So Bill Inman came up with it. And he defined it as, let me see what the screen here says. I have this memorized, but I'll just do this. I don't know. Crucify. I'm going to see him this weekend, so he's going to yell at me if I get it wrong.
Okay.
Bill Inman's definition of a data warehouse is a subject-oriented, non-volatile, integrated, time-variant collection of data in support of management decision-making, right? Notice this doesn't talk about any physical implementation of a data warehouse, quote, data warehouse. It's not a database. It's an architecture. It's a way of thinking about your data. So if we start from that premise, I don't think it changes that much at all. You'll still need those attributes in order to make decisions, right? So now let's jump to what you're saying with large language models. Does this change things? I mean, probably. They need to get better at not hallucinating. But I think, based on the stuff that I've been seeing, that's going to be solved, with knowledge graphs and so forth. Does data warehousing change? I think according to Bill's definition, it won't. I think it's one of these time immemorial things that'll keep going because these are the immutable things you need for decision making. Again, it's you tell me how you're going to make management decisions without these things, and I'll get you a gift card to McDonald's. Pretty classy like that.
You can go to McDonald's in London. It's very classy.
That's because they're everywhere in the world. Right. They're pretty good overseas, actually.
They are probably better than in the U.S. Yeah.
Donald Parrish says he hates that definition of Inman. Well, that's too bad he came up with it.
That'd be that's a whole conversation.
Yeah, go complain to Bill if you have a problem with it. Matt, it says your volume is, Scott Taylor saying your volume's lower, much lower than mine. If you want to redline it, that's great.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Rob has a question. What do you think are the best and reliable tools and skills relevant today for data engineering?
That is a very large, open-ended question.
We got 30 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we talk a lot about, including in our book and elsewhere, is not to get fixated on just like one or two tools. And this is the whole like big data cult that arose, especially 2010s. Like Hadoop, if you're not doing Hadoop, then you're not a serious data person. Later it was, if you're not using Spark, you're not a serious data person. And I think initially, especially in your career, like learn a lot of fundamentals. Like what do fundamental data aggregation operations look like? How, in the general sense, do columnar databases work? How do transactional row-oriented databases work? And then learn some kind of generalities about a lot of different technologies and why you might choose some of those technologies. Once you have a job, and I know that, okay, I'm going to be working with Snowflake, or I'm going to be working with BigQuery, or maybe I'm working with Databricks, then you can go much, much deeper, and you should on that particular tool. But as you're just developing your career, like developing a broad skill set that it could be applied in many areas, plus knowing a lot of theory and a lot of general principles is probably the best way to get started.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't have much to add to that. It's a very fine summary, Matt, of
thank you.
Best and reliable tools. Well, I mean, actually, it's dig into this best and reliable tools parts. I think you talked about some interesting stuff. The best and reliable tools are the ones that's going to help you do your job. Yeah. Right. Those are the best tools. Notice I didn't mention any vendors, right? Okay. All right. So that's whatever's going to work for your use case. I think is the best and reliable tool. The best skills that you can learn are the ones that are related to your job to use these best and reliable tools. I think another important skill is listening
Yeah,
and
agree.
understanding stakeholder needs. This is something that I'm, unpacking in my new course that will be announced in a few months. So,
Yeah.
giving a large preview of it, but requirements gathering is a big piece of that. And I think it's just one of the most underrated things that isn't taught. Surprisingly, in business, MSIS programs, MSBA, all these big data courses, computer science, like stakeholder management and gathering and all this and requirements gathering, all this stuff isn't taught. And it's like it's a damn shame because your first day on the job, guess what you're doing?
Yep. Exactly.
Well, you're first getting your laptop and all that stuff, but then first day on the job when you start working though, it's probably talking to somebody.
And it's especially how you build your success in that job, right? I mean, you can certainly be the kind of data engineer who sits in a corner and works on one problem all day and doesn't talk to anyone and gets an assignment and just works under someone else all the time. And on the other hand, you can be the kind of data engineer who's very good at communicating and gathering business requirements and actually delivering what people are looking for within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And those are more rare skills. I mean, those are the people. It's the people who can combine the technical acumen with those communication skills that really thrive, I think.
Yep. Yeah. So, what are some of the now that we wrote the book? I mean, what is there anything we would have done differently? What's something that comes to mind that data engineers would know that we forgot to add?
It's not so much okay. So I've said, and I'm not sure if you might agree or disagree with this, but I like to. We kind of talk a lot about orchestration actually, and I would probably pull out directed acyclic graphs as a separate theoretical concept just because it shows up all over the place when you're
It's
talking about
everywhere.
orchestration, when you're talking about flows. And that's more of an organizational issue. Like the material is there, but I realize in retrospect that we could have done a better job by like prefacing and saying, okay, here's the theory of directed acyclic graphs. Now here are like 5 places where they appear, and they're just ubiquitous in data engineering. Another thing, we would probably add some material. Like we certainly talk about managing unstructured data, but we would probably spend more time on that given the big shift in emphasis with generative AI. And it's not that it completely reinvents the profession, but again, it's just a difference in emphasis that we could add in a second edition.
Yeah, I think so. I think covering the intersection of machine learning is definitely one area where
Yeah.
I hate the term AI because we're not AI yet,
I know.
but it's
Yeah.
it's what we adopted, so it's
Yeah.
just it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's
We have to say it. It's hype. We've got to like get more views and more inbound.
we have to say it at least 100 times during the show, otherwise we don't hit our quota and we'll not be
Where are we at on the
influencers.
quota? Is anyone counting right now?
Oh, we can have AI count it for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the DAG conversation is pretty interesting. It does pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people, it's funny, like, yeah, it's just one of those theoretical things that we do not do a good job of explaining. What happens to almost everyone, I think, is people hear, oh, directed acyclic graph, that's this thing in Apache Airflow. Don't worry about
Everyone associates it with Airflow.
Yeah, and it's like, no, it's just like everywhere in data engineering. Like behind the scenes, if you run a Snowflake query, it's executing some directed acyclic graph of operations to make that query happen. If you're in using Spark and you run a bunch of operations, that's a directed acyclic graph as you go through transformations. Yeah.
Yep.
It's just a programming model, basically.
Yeah.
But we need to talk about it in those terms because it's an asynchronous programming model, and a lot of data engineering is fundamentally asynchronous, especially as you scale up. You're not necessarily thinking about things just as a series of steps. You're thinking about some graph of operations that can be done in various orders as long as you satisfy the constraints required, and everything upstream is done first.
Could you have a directed cyclic graph?
Well, that's a whole other conversation. That is a thing that exists very confusingly. It's actually something that exists in, I think they're adding it to Apache Beam and other frameworks. It's very, very tricky to program in because when you have cycles, of course, the cycles can lead to infinite loops and such. Anyway.
Yeah, it was a bit of a joke.
Going off in the weeds here, but it's a real thing. Yeah.
That's a real thing. Or you can just use cron jobs. It's great.
Yeah, well, how much of data engineering is still done with cron jobs? I shudder, but it's a reality.
Oh, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's and there's nothing wrong with it, I guess. At a certain degree, if you're
depends, right? I mean, at some point you run into the limitations of cron jobs. So the question is, are you at those limitations or not? And when you get those limitations, then you take on the overhead of orchestration to make your life a lot easier by paying a certain cost up front.
I think people forget about cron jobs though.
Yeah.
They
just kind of run until they break.
Well, you have to go find it. You have to go find cron tab, and then okay, like where is that? Where do I find that again? Oh, right. And then you gotta like, okay, so what's that process referring to there? It's pretty funny. So I've done that before, right? If you have too. It's just it's like forgetting to shut off your stove.
Or like some virtual machine that you didn't even know existed runs out of memory on Thanksgiving Day, and then you're like, "Why is everything broken?"
Why'd you pick Thanksgiving Day? Was that like something happened to you that day?
Yes, that is something that's happened. Has this ever happened to you? It's definitely So prepping for Black Friday, everything went down in the middle. Of Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah, so the people listening to, and if you work in e-commerce, if you're unlucky enough to work in e-commerce during holidays, like you don't actually get holidays because that's your busiest time. So you're working.
And a lot of e-commerce is extremely spiky, which means this issue, we talk in the abstract about scaling and scalability. It becomes very, very concrete when you have something like Black Friday, where maybe a large fraction of all your year's transactions can happen on a single day.
Mm-hmm.
Linux Power Tools. This is great. Yeah. This is real practical data engineering. And let's be frank, when we're talking about skills, this is actually stuff that data engineers should learn. But they should also learn the other ways of doing things, because at some point you outgrow just like the command line single box approach, and you need to grow into something bigger. I should read that because it's for the audio. So forget Linux commands and pull out copy of Linux Power Tools.
Donald Parrish says Black Thursday was fun. One day my server would break. Yep. It's inevitably cursed for that day.
Yeah,
series of days. It's pretty awesome. I don't know, any other topics like data engineering? If you were to, let me ask you this, Matt. If you were to go back to your younger self, and advise them on data engineering, when you're getting into it, what would you tell them?
Oh boy, I'd tell them that Hadoop was going to go away much faster than they were expecting at the time. I don't know. Would you agree with that advice? Like, I don't think
I could see that coming a mile away.
Changing, but maybe it just happened so fast, though.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I think the Hadoop is interesting. What's interesting is you still see a lot of, I would say, data engineering tutorials still referencing Hadoop and Hive for some reason. I think the process is good to know. I think MapReduce is still a good paradigm to understand how
it's
works.
Everywhere. I mean, we don't call it MapReduce, but it's really like if you run Spark, it's doing MapReduce type operations supported by memory now, but that's what it's doing.
Yeah, I understand what it's doing, for sure. But I would say you're not going to be implementing MapReduce. I've seen people say, "Oh, you'll be doing MapReduce." I'm like, I don't know where you're working, but God, I hope not. That would suck, especially if you do that on Black Friday. So, let me see here. Do you see any other questions here? Audience, ask us some questions. Otherwise, Matt and I are just going to keep ranting. I'll ask him about his childhood.
My tech childhood. It was
your tech childhood. Let me see. Ash asks, where can I learn more on temporal models? There's a LinkedIn post from a person from Firebolt. That's probably Rob Harmon who wrote that post. He's big into temporality. Time variance is a big thing that he's amped on. He thinks it doesn't really exist yet. Temporality is an interesting one, right? So you got, for the audience, temporal models is just how you describe time, right? So bitemporality basically describes, event time, when things happen, and when did you process it. Tritemporality is like, when did you process it? When did it happen? Also, when did you make a decision on it? And so forth, right? So, and there are databases that actually handle these types of temporal models here. But I would say, like, where can you learn more? I would say just go on the internet. It's not, I don't know. It's everywhere. Temporal models, unless you have something more specific on that. But
I'm going to pop up another question here. Asking about parallels between Hadoop and AI. And I think the big thing to understand here is that the problem with the Hadoop obsession was not so much that we were trying to scale up data, although we could go off on that for a long time. But it's the idea that we were obsessed with a single tool, like it was going to solve all our problems.
Well, it was a
And we
big
need
data tool.
It was a big data tool, but like, why were we so obsessed with one tool? I guess at the time it was the main open source framework, but in many cases we kind of failed to recognize that the space was going to diversify very quickly. As if you put all your eggs in that basket, if you invested all your time just in core Hadoop skills, those skills were going to go stale pretty fast. The same thing with AI. If you're just focused on one framework like TensorFlow, yeah, learn TensorFlow if you need it, but understand bigger principles of neural nets and machine learning.
Well, I would say it's more like if you'd be focused on one type of model.
Yes,
right? Because TensorFlow can solve a lot of stuff, actually.
Yeah, it can. I mean, it's very powerful.
Yeah, you can do almost anything you want in that. But it'd be like if you were only like into convolutional neural nets, right? And that was like your jam, right? I mean, it's still super useful usually doing convolutions, even when you're making generative AI models, you're still doing convolutions. So I don't know. Right. No parallels between Hadoop and AI. I think in terms of hype cycles, absolutely. There's
that's true.
But let's extend this
big
more
data,
to
right?
big data.
That was the big
Hadoop is kind of definitely hype cycles, and I think big data tools prove their utility, right? It's not like it's was a fad and we're all back to using a single server databases.
But they became boring. Happening. That's what ultimately happened.
That's exactly what happened.
Part, you don't write MapReduce jobs anymore. You just write SQL or Spark code, and the framework takes care of those details for you.
I would say machine learning's been happening in a great degree. Oh crap! I just broke my camera lens cover again. But I was showing my phone because I'm unveiling a new iPhone. But no, I mean your phone has had machine learning in it for ages, right? Your camera is super sophisticated, but we don't marvel at it saying, oh, it's an AI powered camera. It's like it's a camera. It takes awesome photos, better than a lot of photographers used to take, and that's how it is. But the magic, as you point out, everything got boring, and I would say that big data got boring. Big data is now small data again, and big data is just data. To me, AI is going to have a lot of impact when we stop talking about AI. And it's just there. Same with I would say with quote data to a bigger degree. Like I'm ranting about this in my post too, but it's like the moment we can stop referring to things as data is the moment we've won.
Yeah.
Right. Because now that it's integrated into a business process, it's achieving utility, it's providing business value, your favorite term there, and so. Or business performance, I suppose, right? I think to upgrade your nomenclature, and that's where I think we're going to win.
Yeah.
But if we keep referring to things as data, and I think separating data from like the business and the utility we're getting out of it, I mean, we're going to be back to the same hole we've been digging ourselves into for the past several decades. We have to stop using the word data.
It's like it becomes a transparent technology, right? It's like you do whatever you need to do. You interact with stuff behind the scenes, but you don't really see the technology there anymore. And our phones have gotten to that point. To your point, like no one thinks, for the most part, after you buy the new phone, maybe you think about the sophisticated camera for a couple of weeks, and then you just use it. And you
just use it.
There was some survey I saw that like actually only a small swath of the population has actually tried ChatGPT and LLMs, and that's an indication that we're very early in the adoption cycle here. And it's still more about the hype than the utility.
Well, I mean, and think about the valuations a lot of these generative AI startups are getting.
Yeah.
Right. So if ChatGPT usage is already declining, that tells me it's used for school, right? Because it went down during the summer. So we'll see if the numbers start going back up. Because if not, that ain't good.
Right.
This is the most popular tool in the world. And if you see website visits and usage is declining, then it's like, okay, so let's move on. But the evaluations, though, I mean, you're estimating this whole industry is worth trillions of dollars at the end of the day, and and according to Goldman Sachs and everybody else, the AI revolution is supposed to impact jobs across the board and increase GDP by a pretty substantial amount and so forth. So I don't know. I think it's probably all of the above at some point. But these technologies, it's just like water. It finds a way to gravitate towards a place where it goes where it goes, I guess is what I'm saying, right? So,
well, maybe the counter argument is that if students are adopting this early, maybe they're the ones even more than the startups who are going to figure out what it's really useful for. Maybe they're going to drive and that was kind of the case of the internet as well, right? Especially because a lot of college students have access to the internet before anyone else. And
I
so they
did.
figured out exciting things you could do with it. They started companies, and maybe that's exactly what's going to happen with
I hope so. I mean, I'm
generative
bullish
AI.
on long-term
Long
impact of
term,
AI.
yep, yep,
Absolutely. Like,
yeah,
there's nothing to. I don't think I don't think there's any controversy on whether it's going to have utility or not. It's just like, when, and obviously, hype cycles have a way of getting ahead of themselves. That's the
right,
definition of a hype cycle. Is it's supposed to do that
yeah,
by its very nature. If it wasn't a hype cycle, then we wouldn't be talking about how it's a hype cycle.
It drives adoption, right? And then that's where you actually see utility after the adoption curve. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mark Keeling, as barriers to entry for data engineers, mature data engineering tools goes down, what are some good directions to take your career?
Yeah, I mean, to what you were saying earlier, the enterprising stuff, right? And that means
Yeah.
like actually figuring out who your stakeholders are, and how you communicate with them, and how you propose projects that will help them in ways that they had not envisioned. That's where you really have a big impact beyond just your job title, I think.
Yeah, I mean, data engineers want to do engineering things.
Yeah,
That's in your
yeah,
title. But I'm absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. It's one of these things where um, I think just start focusing more on integrating with the business. Like I was saying
right,
earlier with data,
yeah.
don't call it data. Just go help
Mhm.
the business and just become an integral part of that. I think that's where you should take your career. What that manifests itself at, I have no idea. That depends on where
Yeah,
you work. So,
yeah.
yep.
I mean, a lot of the early data science hype after the term was invented focused on like how data scientists would sort of parachute in and grab these data sets without talking to anyone, and find stuff that no one had thought of. And it's true, there were some use cases like that, but I think generally where you see a lot of the value is where you actually go in and communicate with the people who know what they're doing, and ask them about the data, and ask them about their jobs, and ask them about the stuff they care about. And then you can start providing insights that maybe they hadn't thought of because they're not data people to the same degree you are, and say, all right, well, what if we did X, Y, and Z? What if we applied this algorithm to stuff you're doing? Can we enhance your processes? And
Yep.
yeah, it's that
Yeah.
collaboration that generates a lot of new innovation.
And it's interesting too, because you're starting to see AI creeping into the tool sets that
Yeah,
most pedestrians are using, not
yeah,
walking pedestrians, but
right,
pedestrian
right,
users of technology, like Office 365. It's getting its version of Copilot.
right. Mm-hmm.
You know, ChatGPTs and Excel now, and so I mean, it's going to unlock a lot of really interesting stuff. You can also write
Right.
Panda or Python and Excel now. So you did an article on that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
And I talked about it as a collaboration tool.
yeah,
Just because I don't know if you ever ran into this, but I had many, when I was working at a data scientist, I had many cases where people were like, well, can you integrate this to the Excel sheets I use? And of course, I wanted to plug my nose because I'm a data scientist, but also it's actually really useful for people who use Excel, which is a very large swath
yeah.
of the business user population.
Hold your nose, like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like the entire room farted and you walked in.
Right.
For the Excel users.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, Excel is just the cockroach of the
yeah.
world, and basically the inviolable law of the universe is any process that isn't solved with technology becomes an Excel workflow. So, just how it is.
Yeah.
I got a good question here from Elmira. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Any cons to SaaS ELT tools? Fivetran, River, DBT Cloud. She's joining as a founding data engineer to a profitable startup. Congrats on being profitable. It means a lot these days.
Yeah, yeah. It's rare.
All data engineering is currently done on the dashboarding tool. And she says foundations of data engineering is her current table Bible. So thank you. Yeah, good question. Any cons to SaaS ELT tools for a data engineer at a profitable startup?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there have been a lot of critiques of excesses with these tools, of like massive model sprawl in DBT, for example, and very high costs in some cases with Fivetran. I think all of those issues are manageable if you're just careful about how you deploy the tools, if you monitor their usage, if you monitor the costs, and don't just go completely out of control in your usage. I think they're all very useful within appropriate boundaries. I don't
Yep,
know what
I
your
agree.
thoughts.
I
Yeah.
mean, I don't. I mean, let's flip the question. What are the pros of using these versus
Yeah.
rolling your own? Which I would say maybe we'll take that as the
Cron jobs.
the null hypothesis, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
Cron
like
jobs, basically.
cron jobs, yeah.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's say the absence of these tools. If you were to go into a startup, you're gonna have to roll your own stuff.
Yeah.
So you have to write your own ELT workflows, right? And so the question, we actually bring this up in the book, is this a core competency of your company,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is this the best use of your time,
Right.
or are you better off spending your time designing workflows that are mission critical to your company? Not just mission critical, but core competency, right? Because everything is quote unquote mission critical. Data pipelines, I would assume, are mission critical. But if these companies can do a better job at providing that infrastructure than you can, I would say use what's off the shelf.
Yeah.
Right.
I think where the excesses have sometimes come in is that a company will start deploying Fivetran, and then pretty soon they start ingesting every possible data source that they have with Fivetran, and the costs go way, way up.
Why do costs go up in Fivetran, Matt?
I mean, there's a cost model. You do pay for rows that you consume and rows that change, and so if you start ingesting really large data sets, the costs can explode. And I think the solution there is just to focus on what are we actually using these data sets for. In many cases, like, let's just create some random dashboard that no one uses because we can. Well, is that a good use of money? It might. In many cases, it's not doing it because you can. But if it's something that's useful to a stakeholder, say it's some analytics that they do manually that you can automate and save them a lot of time or provide them with deeper insights, then I think it's totally worth the cost in most cases.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think that it's just read the manual, as I always tell people. Again, it's an education issue. Like every tool has pros and cons. Understand the boundaries of it. Understand the cost considerations. Like the thing is, these companies tell you how to optimize costs. It's not like they keep this a secret. Snowflake has like tons and tons of documentation on how to control costs. It's not like they're keeping this, so just know what you're doing at the end of the day. Yeah. Same with DBT Cloud, right? So maybe just don't put it on, a refresh cadence.
Yep.
It's frequent for model builds in DBT Cloud, for example. But it's like at the end of the day, you're responsible for understanding how these tools work and how you're being charged. So I'd say just use them appropriately.
Yeah, and find your hotspots, like find what models are driving a lot of your costs and start focusing on those. Just be aware of what you're spending. Don't spend at the maximum size Snowflake warehouse without thinking about what you're doing. I don't know how many times I've seen teams spend a couple $1,000s a day when they intended to spend like $50 by just cranking up the warehouse size.
They could.
Yeah.
You could. You got to know what you're doing. Like that's just it. Like read the documentation and understand how this applies to your use case. I don't know how else to put it. It's like it's just but this again, it's a knowledge gap, right? This is everyone wants to get these tools and nobody wants to take the time to understand how to use them. Like, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. And just an awareness gap. Like we have to move beyond the like I'm playing with the toys stage, saying these toys cost money. Like just be aware of what you're spending, and it's okay to spend money when there's utility, but don't just arbitrarily spend piles and piles of cash for nothing.
Or do it. I mean,
if you want to, if you have the budget, right?
If you're a hot AI startup, then screw it. Just spend all the money you got. Who cares? It's not your money. I'm just joking. Don't
just raise another round.
Raise another round. You got it. So you got another question here from Serge. What's up, Serge? You just wanted to hang out with at the conference. Say my company is clueless about AI, and yet we followed the hype. You're a capable data engineer. Yes, you in the Mage T-shirt. That's me. You have free reign. What project would you propose? Let's assume this is a typical retail company. So retail is an interesting one. I would say the impactful things that you can do in data: supply chain, sales, and marketing. There's three areas I would focus on. Supply chain is super critical, but it also lends itself really well to data because forecasting is super important. Like that's literally what it all boils down to. So I'd say that's the low-hanging fruit. Finding ways to optimize marketing spend and improve sales is the other two areas I'd focus on. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I would say this is still kind of tricky at this point. Retail is interesting. I don't have a great answer for this at this point. I'm going to refrain from answering this at the moment. I mean, you used
to work at an e-commerce company, though. It's like, but recommendation models. I mean, that's just drive sales, right?
Yeah. You just have to be careful about hallucination and like random generation and such and recommenders.
But making up products that don't exist.
But maybe more basic use cases like taking product images and kind of tweaking them a bit to make them look a bit nicer. But you just have to make sure that if you do that, you're not misleading the consumer. You're like enhancing the lighting a bit to make something look a little more interesting, but not actually creating a product that doesn't exist. And that's the very tricky part is use these tools at your own risk and make sure that you're taking responsibility for them.
Or just blame it on the other guy.
Yeah. It's just
or the vendor. Blame the vendor. Blame the vendor. Always blame. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Don't blame yourself though. Never take accountability for anything you're doing. That's how you get ahead in life. It's always somebody else's fault. Let's see here. What other horrible advice can we give people? Let's see here. Andrew, it's more of a comment or a question. How to get these cloud certs and the materials locked behind expensive premium cloud content? Well, that's a good question. We've taken a lot of cloud certs. Matt, what do you think?
I mean, it depends, right? So a lot of the material is actually free. So most of the Snowflake materials, if you want to do any of the Snowflake certs, most of that you can just get by reading documentation.
And actually, you should, because that test actually had some gotcha questions. I can't say because we're under NDA on the exam, but
right.
Things that you've never used before, things you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Go look at the documentation for that part.
Definitely. The very obscure corners of the documentation. I mean, the training courses themselves can be very expensive. The virtual ones cost a small amount of money. And then the like on-site or live training courses get very, very expensive. And they're useful, but there's a lot you can get just by reading the documentation.
I mean, you did the AWS Analytics specialty, I think, just by using the study guide and reading the docs
materials. In that case, I didn't have to pay for real specific. I didn't even buy the official guide or anything like that.
I mean, AWS's questions also, the user practice exam, I mean, it gives you a flavor for the types of it's more important, I think, to understand the types of questions you're being asked.
Right.
They're reading comprehension at the end of the day. And it's always like the most obvious answer is not usually the correct answer. Especially when you're talking about pro and specialty exams,
right.
There's a lot of nuance. There's always two possible questions or answers, and it's always that like one is slightly a better answer than the other one, but they're both sort of correct, actually.
Well, and the point is there are these skills that you can learn to be better at taking this type of exam. So, for example, what I call parallel reading. So parallel reading means that in many cases, two of the answers will be almost identical, except there will be one or two differences. So you need to look at them and then pull out the differences. Don't focus on the whole answer. Focus on, here are the 2 points that differ. Why might this being true or false here make this a correct or incorrect answer? And then try to eliminate using those techniques. Because if you just try to read the entire answer and then read the entire, answer B and C without just focusing on the differences, it takes too long. I mean,
yeah, and you only have a certain number of minutes, like 2, I think, max to do these questions. So the way I do it is like, I go through the exam once, just answer the best I can, flag them for review. The ones I have questions on, it's usually like half the questions actually.
And then you refine after a couple of rounds, right? You move fast and then you go back and you refine.
Yeah, go back and refine. And also you're going to miss some, so just know the number of questions you can probably get wrong and still pass.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So you don't get extra credit if you get 100% of these things. You just pass the damn exam.
Yeah.
But documentation, the FAQs in AWS, I would say, are the best for researching, the types of stuff you might be asked. But at the end of the day, I think the courses are good, but they're only good, I think, in terms of covering the bare basics. At the end of the day, I mean, we're veterans of this stuff. I don't even know how many sorts we've done at this point. A lot
of those.
But it's like, just the docs are usually your best place to go. Just a single source of truth, right?
Yeah.
So
another suggestion is go look at blog posts. I mean, there are lots of blog posts about people's experiences taking for example, Google Cloud Platform Professional Data Engineer exam. And those blog posts will help you to get a flavor for what the focus is and what's really hard and what's easy, and really allow you to hone your studies maybe more than even an official course.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And those are generally free. Yeah.
Generally free, which is rare these days. Everything costs so much money. But cool. I think it's a good place to wrap. I got to get some calls after this. So you're going to be in Budapest. Good luck on your trip, man. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Crunch Conf, Serial Conference, I think.
5th and 6th. Yeah. I'd love to see people there. If you're going to be there, just hit me up. I'd love to connect.
Yeah.
We've got the O'Reilly. We've got the book club tomorrow.
Oh yeah, we have that tomorrow, huh?
Yeah, I think that's noon Eastern.
Noon Eastern. I don't think in terms of Eastern time. That's 10 a.m. my time. And then we got what else? Shamak Dagani and I are doing a data mesh roundtable on Wednesday. So if you're part of the data mesh learnings meetup, come check it out. It'll be the Joe and Shamak show. Where it'll be a lot of fun. I don't know. And then what else is going on? Got the Joe Reis show. A couple podcasts are going to be dropping. At least one. I think Bob Muglia, former CEO of Snowflake, dropping that one, and that was a really fun chat. So
that's cool.
That's dope. That guy knows his stuff. I would say there's data people, and there's people like Bob who are just OGs and just started on a different level. And then, geez, next week, next Monday morning data chat, I think we have Colleen Fosh on the show. She's actually my coach. But we're going to talk about, yeah, because I was talking to her, and I thought it'd be great to talk about just, it seems like in tech and data, it's like everyone's stressed out. Lifestyle is a big thing, you know, and I think she works in data as well. So we're just going to talk about, you know, how do you make tweaks to your lifestyle so you can live a better, you know, so you can work better, perform better, bring yourself, you know, the best version of yourself to work. I think it's a hugely underrated topic that deserves a discussion. So it's going to be a bit different, but I think it's relevant to a lot of people because everyone I meet, man, they're just running on fumes. It's this is not a healthy profession.
Well, and our assumption in this profession is that if you spend all your time working, you're going to get more done. And I think that's actually false. We just run ourselves into the ground and our productivity just drops.
Oh yeah, no, it's like that old anti-drug ad from the 80s or 90s where it was, you know, I gotta do more cocaine so I can do more work, so I can make more money, so I can buy more coke.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever saw that one. It's a good strategy.
No, but I was just like, yeah, it's a good strategy. But it's true. I mean, that's we just run ourselves into the ground, and she's been a godsend to helping me out, just get my life in order, and so I think it's gonna be a great one. But anyway, thanks to the audience. Yeah, great questions. Again, it's just for the past couple of weeks have been Matt and I guess Chris Tab last week too, which was funny. Apologies for the audio. Somebody commented that the audio was a bit crap last week, but the microphone was, I don't know, Chris and I are sharing it, so that's what happens. Okay. Oh yeah, and here's Santona. What's up? She just give a quick shout out. If you're looking for something to do after getting off this awesome live show, we have a data capture, change data capture roundtable. Ethan, Brian, and Roy Hassan and Santona will be there. So go check it out. Santona, drop a link if you want to, but yeah, it should always be fun. All right, I got to cut out, man. But yeah, thanks to the audience, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.